Today, we're speaking with Carrie Skalski, president and founder of Presales Mastery, which helps B2B software companies deliver better demos to win more business. Carrie is also the co-author of the Presales Buyer Guide, a definitive source of information on vendors serving presales organizations, and he's also the founder at Sales Engineering of Toronto.
Have been in pre-sales for 20 years, first 4 as an independent contributor or individual contributor, then as a sort of global pre-sales and sales enablement leader, and then the last 4 running Presales Mastery as a demo coach, really focused on up-leveling individual SEs' presentation and demo skills. So have been in pre-sales for a couple decades now.
What are some of your favorite tips and tricks for SEs right now?
Yeah, so a couple of interesting ones. So the first that I find is really universal, independent of how much tenure or seniority or experience each SE has, is what I call the familiarity trap, which, for those familiar with the term, is my term for basically the curse of knowledge. And it's the idea that because we are so familiar with our subject matter and our product and our company, we intuitively assume that the people that we're talking to understand what we're saying, when in reality, often we're under-explaining a lot of concepts that the prospect really doesn't understand. And it's very pervasive. And the easiest example I can give is probably the use of jargon. So everyone's familiar with jargon, any sort of industry or company-specific term or acronym or phrase. And the challenge with jargon when we use it is that most people, when we use a term that they're unfamiliar with in a meeting, will not ask for clarification. And mostly that's because of a fear of looking ignorant or naive in front of their peers or even their boss. And so what happens is they'll just hear that term and not clarify it. And what happens from that is that the overall messaging that that term is part of also ends up being obscured. So jargon's a really simple example where that happens, but even things like, assuming that everyone can see and interpret everything that's on your screen immediately, when in reality, most of the time when we're demoing, people are getting their first exposure to our product and can't easily interpret exactly what's on the screen, especially in a couple of seconds. So that would be my first one, is to try and avoid the familiarity trap. And the easiest way I can give people as a tip on how to do that is to pretend that you're presenting to your grandmother or your grandfather. And how would you change your verbiage and your language and your tone so that they better understand what you're getting at? Chances are you'd probably dumb it down or simplify it a lot for them. And similar sort of thing usually works really well with prospects. You obviously don't want to overstep that and make it sound like you're being patronizing by dumbing it down too much, but it is something that everyone should be aware of.
What are some positive trends you're seeing with pre-sales this year?
So I think, and you guys can relate to this, given that you're in the space, but I've had a unique opportunity in, as you mentioned earlier, working with Chris White to co-author the Presales Buyer's Guide. And so Chris and I have become very intimate with most of the vendors in the space. I think it's an amazing trend that the adoption of tooling for pre-sales, both for individual contributors and for leaders, is starting to grow more pervasive. I think it was a slow start when these solutions started coming out a couple of years ago, in that people didn't necessarily know about them or how they could improve their teams or their performance. The other challenge is, for the most part, pre-sales tends not to hold budget and isn't usually responsible for buying stuff. And so it was a challenge sort of helping pre-sales leaders build the business case internally to convince sales leadership and finance that they should be investing in what the business case was for actually helping pre-sales be more effective. So I think we're seeing a pretty impressive sea change across the board now, where the value props for these solutions are much more relevant and obvious now, and more organizations are starting to adopt them wholeheartedly.
What are some trends you're ready to see end this year?
I'm ready to see the end of remote-only demos and presentations. I think most of us are probably zoomed out for the most part, in that it's been sort of the exclusive method of interacting with our prospects and our customers for the last couple of years. I know a subset of organizations are now finally starting to get back into the field. I know me personally, I love being in front of prospects. It's just so much easier to read and respond to the room and individuals. It's easier to connect with people. And frankly, we're in sales. We should want to be in front of people. So I'm excited to see more of that, to start to get back to being sort of the norm rather than exception.
What are some of your favorite resources or tooling for SEs right now?
So I'll give you one tooling suggestion, and then I'll selfishly talk about one resource selection. So on the tooling side, there is so many really cool and interesting solutions that are out there. There's also some really neat sort of small tools that are inexpensive and super easy to adopt, but fix really sort of challenging issues that are fairly pervasive in pre-sales. In fact, someone I was coaching today on a demo ran into this challenge, and there's a solution out there called Demo Story, and their website is demostory.io. And what they've done is they've created a Chromium-based browser that is used exclusively for demos. Now, why is that needed? For most solutions, we're typically demoing multiple personas during our demos. We might, doing a finance person, a technical user, the frontline user, the manager, et cetera. All of those have different logins, different configured reports and things, et cetera, that a lot of the time require us to use either multiple browsers or incognito type windows, or even just log out of the first one before we log into the second one, all of which makes for very disjointed demo flows when we're constantly logging in or switching browsers. Demo Stories created a tool where effectively each browser is its own separate equivalent of an incognito instance. And so you can have as many different personas logged in simultaneously on multiple browser tabs, where now you don't have to switch out to different browsers. You can color code the tabs so you know exactly which ones are for which persona. You can even label each of the tabs as well. And so it's a fairly lightweight tool, super easy to use. So if you're challenged around multi-persona demos in terms of just logistical demo flow, really, really neat tool to check out. The other thing I'll mention is a resource-based one, and then selfishly again, is check out, if you haven't already, the Presales Buyer's Guide. It's presalesbuyersguide.com. One of the things that Chris and I did in creating this guide was we really wanted to fill the gap in the market around sort of awareness and clarity of what all these amazing vendors, Navattic included, were doing and how they were helping pre-sales teams and individuals. But what we also did that might help especially pre-sales leaders better understand where they should be focusing their investment dollars and or their effort in terms of finding some tooling. We sort of decomposed the market into 5 sort of focus areas or subcategories. And we defined for each of those the specific benefits and use cases that each of those focus areas addresses. And so if you're concerned about what do I do first? Do I do demo automation? Do I do pre-sales team management? Do I do knowledge and response management? Checking out the guide will help you sort of determine and prioritize which use cases are most applicable to your business, and then based on that, which areas and which vendors you may want to explore.
Last, just wanted to give you a chance to promote Pre-Sales Mastery and give a plug for anyone looking for personalized one-on-one call coaching.
So as you mentioned, we basically do call coaching for demos. And so we basically work with B2B software sellers to turn them into demo rock stars. So why is our approach different? Well, group training in and of itself can be very helpful, but it has its inherent limitations. And when we created Pre-Sales Mastery, we really wanted to solve 3 of those. One is it's group training, and each individual has their own unique skill and experience gaps. So if you're not working one-on-one with people, it's harder to really get to an A+ type of performance rather than say a B+ with group training. The second challenge around group training is it's like any other one-off sales training, which is very ineffective in the long term. Lots of research that shows that we tend to forget 90% of what we learn in one-time sales training. So if anyone's been to sales kickoff, they had that initial great bump for 2 weeks where they got excited and they got all these new techniques, and then we get complacent and then we forget. And a month later, we're all back to our old bad habits. And so what we tried to do to get around that was we tend to coach each individual on a demo each month over 3 to 6 months. So we can start to reinforce and turn into sales muscle memory that feedback. And then the last thing that we wanted to solve with Presales Mastery was the idea that most group training, when you're presenting back to your manager or a third-party trainer, those tend to be simulated type exercises. And how we behave in the wild, so to speak, in front of our prospects is typically different than how we behave in simulated environments. And so we wanted to basically say, how do we start coaching on real behavior in front of prospects? And that's why we do call coaching on demos that have already been delivered to prospects so that you can really understand how to improve your client-facing performance.